Hi guys, it's Drama Go Girl here. And with season 3 of Rebels just concluded, and with Celebration starting tomorrow, I thought I'd make a quick rundown of my rankings of the episodes of season 3, and I can analyze them a little, especially since I didn't start my reaction videos till about episode 15 of the series. And so this will allow me to give some quick opinions on the episodes, along with a little bit of ranking, and also keep in mind for this ranking that it may not all be very specifically ranked, and also that this is my opinion, and if you think an episode was better than another one, or if an episode should have been lower or higher on my list, just remember it's my personal opinion, and so no hate, please. Also, keep in mind there will be spoilers for all the episodes in season 3, so make sure you go watch those first. Okay, without further ado, let's get to the countdown. First episode on my list is Iron Squadron, which is episode 8, and I noticed that a lot of people, myself included, thought this was a more filler, I guess, kind of episode. It didn't really have that big of an effect on the main plot. A lot of the Iron Squadron didn't really seem that influential or important outside of Mark being a nephew of Sato. But even then, we never saw Iron Squadron after this episode, and maybe if we saw Mar in the finale or reacting to Sato's death or something, maybe it would be more influential, but since we haven't seen them since the episode, it feels more like a filler, especially since you could call a lot of the members of Iron Squadron like knockoffs of people in the Ghost. Like a lot of people compared Mar to young Ezra, with how he acted at times, and he just had a similar kind of attitude. Alright, for the next one, we have the Kazoo Job, and I probably really botched up the name, but I apologize. This was episode 9 of the series, and this was another episode that didn't really have the big effect on the main plot. It was just it was good because it had some intense moments compared to Iron Squadron, and it continued the series along, and it had some Hondo humor, but besides that, it was not that big effect on the main plot. Alright, the next one we have is the Imperial Extraction, which is episode 4, and this was a good episode because we finally figured out how Wedge got to join the Rebels, and we also got to see more of the inner workings of some places in the Empire, which is, in this case, the Fighter Academy, which was kind of interesting because it gave us more insight into the Empire side of things, which was always cool to see since we usually are sticking with the Rebels most of the time. And the reason it's not higher on my list, though, is honestly, it at parts it dragged a bit, but it still had a lot of intense moments, and it was very interesting throughout. Alright, next we have Warhead, which was episode 14 of the series, and in this episode we got to see the Imperial infiltrator kind of probe droid for the first time, which was interesting. We also got some pretty intense moments as Zeb tried to fight it off, but throughout the episode it did feel like another episode that kind of tended to drag a little bit with the Zeb parts, but it was still kind of interesting to get to see this new kind of droid and its interactions with the Rebels and how they had to figure out how to make sure it didn't get the location of their base to the Empire. And at the end, we also got a intense moment where Thrawn narrowed his search through Zeb's actions of trying to get rid of the droid, but by getting rid of the droid, in the end, it narrowed Thrawn's search because apparently Thrawn only sent the droids to a handful of planets and not every single planet. So it sent up tensions for the future, which was good. Alright, next we have Heroes, which was episode 5 of the season. And this episode was interesting because, not counting Thrawn's small amount of screen time in the first episode, this was the first time we really got to see Thrawn in this season, and it also was interesting because it was his first real interaction with the Rebels. We got to see him interact with Hera. We also got to learn a bit more about Hera's background and history, and a little bit more about the Twi'leks. I apologize if I mispronounce stuff, guys. I really try my best. We got to learn more about the Twi'leks history, and that was interesting about family history. We also got to see more about Thrawn's relations and his caring about art. We also got up to the point where he captured Hera and Ezra, which was a pretty intense moment already because we have seen capture in the series before this, but it was interesting to see Thrawn's interaction with Hera. That was quite interesting, and how easily Thrawn could tell that Ezra was in the room. That was also interesting as well. Alright, next we have Double Agent Droid, which is where for the first time in like 2 seasons, the Empire finally recognized that they got past Chopper's disguise and recognized him as the rebel infiltrator, which was kind of nice to finally see the Empire do something kind of smart like that. But in this episode, we got some pretty intense moments where the crew almost got sucked into space, and where we just got where Chopper literally came at AP5 with blasters, which is pretty cool to see, I guess. Droids with blasters is always interesting, but then we also got some singing, which was interesting. Some people didn't like that, but I personally thought it was quite funny, especially since Dave Filoni even said that it was supposed to be humorous, and I enjoyed that. He would include some humor, as it's easier to stick in more droid-centered episodes like this. And we also got to see Hera get extremely mad, which was interesting, and we got to see how protective she is as Chopper, as she literally exploded an entire ship very violently, which was interesting. So overall, this episode was interesting and fun to follow along with, and though people could call it filler, it was at least a really good droid episode, and it was interesting to watch. Alright, next we have episode 10 of the series, which is An Inside Man. This episode was interesting because we got to see more into the Imperial side of things, as we got to see the Imperial TIE factory, and we also got to go back to Lothal for this episode, which was nice because we haven't been to Lothal in a while. We also got to see a pretty intense moment as Thrawn literally kills a guy by making him continue to experiment on a bike that everyone, including the viewers, knew was rigged based on what had been discussed, and it was pretty violent for the show, which was interesting and intense. Cool to see that Thrawn could be that intense. But one thing that did annoy people is how quickly, especially like Ezra and the wife or whatever, I think it's the wife, got over his death, because it seemed like Ezra was like angry for maybe like 30 seconds, and then he kind of got over it, and it was kind of more focused on the subject at hand. And it also, another really cool thing in this episode is we finally got the confirmation of Kallus being Fulcrum, which was nice, because people had been speculating and people were pretty sure, but this episode finally gave us the confirmation that Kallus is Fulcrum, so that was nice to finally have that confirmation. So overall, it was a good, interesting episode, and it really helped set up future events that would happen, which was nice. Oh, and the ending was pretty good, with Thrawn talking to Kallus and talking about the future, and you could tell that Kallus was kind of well, not really scared, but he kind of knew that things were probably going to happen in the future, which made this whole episode just end on a very intense note, which made us excited for the future episodes, so it was good. Alright, next we have episode 6 of the season, which is The Last Battle. This episode was nice because we got a lot of Clone Wars callbacks. We also had some pretty intense moments in this episode, with Ezra getting shot once and Rex getting shot twice, and just little lucky Kanan didn't get shot at all in this episode because he was just lucky. But we had some good humor between Rex and the tactical droid, and with Zeb mixing, we just got some good humor moments, but we also got to see our first little interaction between battle droids and the stormtroopers, which is also a really funny moment. But yeah, it was kind of cool to get to see some Clone Wars callbacks and get to see them all mixed together, and get to see the separatists droids working together with Rex and Kanan and Ezra and Zeb to try to get rid of the Empire. And also it was cool at the ending to get to see the little rebels mixed with Clone Wars kind of ending of the episode, which made the whole episode just really feel reminiscent of the Clone Wars, which was nice because it was a nice little callback episode, which made the episode fun to watch. Next up we have Imperial Super Commandos, which was episode 7 of this season. And I like this episode because whenever we get something related to Mandalore, it's always usually interesting for me. We also finally got some more background to Sabine's past. We learned that her mom is actually alive, which was nice to finally get some more background on Sabine and what's going on with life. And it was shocking to some people who thought, by the way she made it sound in the beginning of season 1, she kind of made it sound like the Empire, full on dealt with her parents, they were either dead or captured like Ezra's. But it was nice to finally get that confirmation. We also got to see some pretty intense moments as they had the jetpack chase, which was teased in the season 3 trailer, but it was finally cool to see that whole fiasco go down, and we got to see a little bit of hand to hand between Gar Saxon and Sabine. We also got to finally see Imperial related Mandalorians, which was also interesting to see. Overall, it was interesting to see more Mandalore related stuff, especially to the Imperials. Also, we got a little bit of humor with Ezra trying to come up with all his different disguises using Hondo and Lando, and it was kind of funny. Surprised he didn't go straight to Jabba. That was the first time we didn't see him go straight to Jabba the Hutt or whatever, so I think he's finally learned his lesson on that. But overall, it's an interesting episode, and it was nice to see some more Mandalore stuff finally. Next, we have Ghost of Geonosis, which was episode 12 and episode 13 of season 3. This episode was nice because after all the long years after Clone Wars, even though it wasn't that long, we finally got to see Saw Gerrera again, which was nice. Outside of Rogue One, we finally got to see him in animated form again, which was interesting. We also got to go back to Geonosis, which was also nice. We got to have some pretty intense moments with the bugs and then the Imperials coming in and almost trapping and burying the ghost, which was pretty intense in part 2. We also had some humor mixed in with all the intense moments. We also got to see more of how Saw Gerrera is more of an extremist, which was interesting to get to see again. Because it's been referenced before in multiple things. Yeah, and then we finally got to see that what happened to Geonosis and why life has ceased to exist is because apparently the Empire released some kind of poisonous gas of some sort that apparently killed off all the bugs. So that was interesting to finally got that revelation, and the rebels were very close. If it wasn't for the Empire, the rebels probably could have exposed the Empire for doing this. And so besides not having much come out of this episode, it still was very enjoyable to watch. And what I mean by not come much out of the episode is it didn't really have that much effect on the future, but it was still very interesting to watch, and it was interesting to get to see Saw Gerrera again, and hopefully we get to see him again in season 4. Next up, we have another 2-parter, Steps into Shadow, which was episode 1 and episode 2 of season 3. These episodes were interesting because we finally, after having that really epic season finale for season 2, we finally got to see how it's affected all the characters. We got to see how Ezra's grown, but also how the Sith holocron has been changing him as he's been using it after he opened it in the season 2 finale. We also got to see how Kanan's reacting to his blindness and how it's affecting him, and how it's causing him to act around others and not around others, and how he's been avoiding people. We also got to see the Bendu, which was interesting. We got to see Kanan interact with the Bendus. The Bendu tries to teach Kanan to learn how to see using the Force, which was interesting. We also got to see the beginning of the rebonding between Kanan and Ezra, but we didn't really see that rebonding much in this episode. We just got to see the beginning of it, as we had a little small moment between them at the end, but we still hadn't really gotten the confirmation that everything was okay and good. But overall, this episode, we had some really good, intense moments. We had the death of the original Phantom as it exploded when the station was when the station lost its power. It fell and exploded, which was a pretty intense moment, as it's a ship we have been following for 2 seasons, and it's an important part of the Ghost, and so it was a pretty intense moment to go through. And we also had that intense moment when the station was falling and Kanan had to save Ezra. It was a really good, intense, interesting episode, and it was really good to have that intense episode after going off that very strong finale. So it was a good episode to watch. Next up, we have Visions and Voices, which was episode 11. This episode was interesting because we finally got to see some more interactions with Maul. We got to see, again, some interesting callbacks to Clone Wars. We got to see the Night Sisters, and we got to see the Darksaber, and we got to see a little callback to Satine as well with the shrine, which was a bit creepy if you really think about it, that he built a shrine to someone he killed with the Darksaber. But it was interesting because we got to see the Darksaber in action and used to when Sabine was possessed. She was using it, which was interesting to see as well. We also Maul finally discovered where Obi-Wan was, so we got that kind of cliffhanger, and Ezra also believed that Obi-Wan is the key to destroying the Sith. It was, through speculation, it's probably just because Maul was trying to look for Obi-Wan through the magic and not that he's the actual key to destroying the Sith, because you would think more that it's Luke and not Obi-Wan, but that's just through speculation. Not completely sure if it's been confirmed, but I can speculate that. So it was an overall intense episode. We got to see some pretty intense moments through the Kanan and Sabine being possessed and having to fight Ezra, and it was nice to finally get that confirmation. And we also got some pretty emotional moments as Maul is trying to get Ezra to come with him, and a lot of people think about how Ezra is kind of like, he wants Ezra to go with him because he misses having like a brother, a companion, and he always calls Ezra apprentice because he sees him kind of a companion like Savage was. So it was an overall interesting episode, and it was a good ending point for before we went to Ghost of Geonosis, when we had that break in between the mid-season, where the mid-season trailer came in. So it was a good episode. Next, I have Secret Cargo, which was episode 18 of the season. This episode was interesting because we finally got to see Mon Mothma in Rebels, which was really cool to get to see her. This episode was interesting because we finally got to see the first real, after Mon Mothma's speech, we got to see more of a joining as we start to more see the joining of the different rebel cells and how they're all starting to join to form the more formatted together rebellion. It was interesting we got some intense moments. We also got with finally getting to see the TIE Defenders in use. Even if it was just one prototype, it was still cool to get to see that, and how it lasted the longest in the nebula. That was interesting. And also we had some pretty cool visuals with the destruction of the Star Destroyer in the nebula, which was also kind of cool. It was an overall interesting episode because it was cool to kind of finally get to see this beginning formation and how it's starting to lead more into Rogue One, and we're starting to get more close to that kind of time period as we're starting to go from the more separate rebel cells or just the Ghost crew and the beginnings of the rebellion to now we're going more into the more joined up rebellion. So it was a good, interesting episode for that. Next, I have the Halkans of Fate, which was episode 2 of the season. And this episode, it was interesting because we got our first look at what it was like to combine both a Jedi and a Sith holocron, which was interesting, and we learned that by combining them you can learn knowledge and find hidden secrets throughout the combination of the two, which I found really interesting. And also we got some pretty intense moments with Kanan being sent out into space, and we also got some. If the episode itself felt a lot longer than it actually was, because we got a variety of different things. We also got the emotional ties where Kanan and Ezra seemed to emotionally fix their relationship. We got some more talking between the Bendu and Kanan and Ezra about combining the holocrons and what it can mean and what secrets can do. We got Maul's beginning to he found out in this episode that Obi-Wan is alive, which was the beginning, which would eventually lead to him finding out where Obi-Wan was, which would eventually lead to the episode where they face off, which was interesting. And also we had the combination of the holocron, so all these 3 different big events all mashed together to make this episode feel a lot longer than it actually was, which made it really interesting and intriguing, as many different things happened in this episode that were all very interesting together. So this episode was very entertaining for me, and it also made us look forward to future episodes where we get to learn more about Obi-Wan and Maul, and since he just says he lives, a lot of people speculated right away that was Obi-Wan, but it especially makes it more interesting as we had to think about that, even if people didn't get it right off the bat. So it was an overall really interesting episode, and it was a really good episode in the season. Next is Legacy of Mandalore, which is episode 16 in the series. I love this episode. It was a part of the Mandalore arc, which I loved that this season had. We got to see Sabine face off Gar Saxon with the Darksaber, which was a very interesting and intriguing fight, with some pretty intense moments. Especially at the end of the fight, where Sabine uses a kind of Anakin-like maneuver to almost kill Gar Saxon, but then she doesn't. But then we have Gar Saxon who almost shoots Sabine, but luckily is killed by Sabine's mother. It was just very interesting to go to Sabine's home planet, get to see her mom and her brother for the first time, and get to see this fight finally go down that we've been waiting for throughout the series, is seeing Sabine finally really use the Darksaber and finally win a battle like this. And it was just a very interesting episode, and it was a really good ending to the Mandalore arc that the season had. Next I have Through Imperial Eyes, which was episode 17. And going off the Mandalore arc, you would really want to keep up the hype and keep the season strong. And they really did that with this episode, presenting a really interesting and intriguing episode, but where Kallus had to try to outsmart the Imperials in order to escape Thrawn's suspicions of who's Fulcrum and to keep his identity secret, while as also trying to get Ezra, and Ezra supposedly himself is what Ezra wanted to do, but eventually he ended up staying, which honestly was good / bad, because even though he warns the rebels in the finale, it doesn't make that big a difference, which is all it seems like he really did in between that episode and the finale. But and we also got the end of the episode, we also got the confirmation finally from Thrawn that he knows that Kallus is Fulcrum. Some people suspected he knew previous to this episode, but it was finally shown in this episode completely that it was that Kallus is Fulcrum, and it's kind of interesting how he used art to piece it together, as Thrawn tends to use art to piece things together. So that was interesting and cool to see. It was just an interesting game of cat and mouse episode between Thrawn and Kallus, and it was kind of intriguing to follow along and just see what would happen, and it was an overall good episode in the season. Next we had Twin Suns, which was episode 20 in the season. This episode was interesting because we finally got to see the confrontation between Maul and Obi-Wan, which a lot of people have been looking forward to. And although a lot of people said the fight was pretty short, I personally thought it was very intense, and for how short it was very powerful. And sometimes shorter things can be just as powerful as long, epic-looking fights. And although it would have been cool to see a long fight between them, I still think just having the short one was nice to have as well. So overall, this episode, we got to also see a conversation between Ezra and Obi-Wan, which is interesting, and Obi-Wan gave him some advice, which hopefully he'll take into heart in the future. And it was overall interesting to watch as Ezra journeys to find Obi-Wan, and then eventually we get to meet up with Maul and have the fight, and it was just a really interesting episode, and that's why it's so high on my list. I loved watching it. Next on my list at number 2, I had Trials of the Darksaber, which was episode 15 in this season. And this season, this was one of the best, if not the best, episodes that Rebels gave us. It was very intense and emotional. We got to finally learn even more about Sabine's past, and this really gave us an insight about what happened and why she left her family, and we got in a very intense emotional format. The music to this episode was absolutely beautiful, and they continuously use it when Sabine is used, and I even noticed in older episodes previous to this they used it when Sabine was on screen, but this episode really got to finally show that music full out, and the intense emotion, all the emotion in this episode was just really good, and it made the episode really interesting and to watch. and it made it really entertaining for the viewer, and it made me love this episode so much because I just love Sabine, and I loved the emotional level and how she finally opened up about this, and it eventually helps her because now that she's opened up about this, she feels a lot more free, and it was just in my opinion, the best part of all the Mandalore episodes we got this season, and I loved it, and that's why it was one of my favorite episodes this season. Just finally getting to see the Darksaber be used and getting to see all this emotion be released and having that such a powerful ending that this episode had, it just made it a really good episode in this season, and one I highly recommend that if you haven't seen, you go watch right now. And finally, the best episode in this season is 0 Hour episodes 21 and 22. And again, this episode was very intense and emotional, like a lot of my favorites, and it had a lot of good moments. Like, we had an emotional moment between Kanan and Ezra where they were talking together, and it was a really cute emotional moment, and it made a lot of people worried that somebody like Kanan would die, which was very worrying, especially for me, because it seems like Kanan at the end of seasons, he always seems to get it the worst. Like, in season 1 he was captured, and in season 2 he was blinded, and just, it'd be kind of sad and depressing if in season 3 he would end up dying, but thankfully he didn't. But we did also have some other moments of intensity where we weren't sure what was going to happen, and there was high stakes with Thrawn discovering the location of their base. There was a lot of fighting, and we lost a lot of ships on the rebel side of this episode. We also had the death of Commander Sato, which, although he wasn't a main protagonist, he was still a big part of Phoenix Squadron, which is the rebel cell which we had been following throughout the past 2 seasons. So that was a pretty emotional moment for this episode. It was cool to see that the Mandalorians came back in to help out the rebels, and how they would eventually lead to the escape of the rebels. So it wasn't even the rebels themselves. Without the help of the Mandalorians, they probably wouldn't have gotten out of there, so that was kind of cool to see. And also, we left off on a good note, which made us, with Ezra and Kanan, which made us look forward to the future for season 4 and what's going to come in the future, and it was just a very powerful ending, and it was a good ending to the season. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about what my ideas for the future are and what I want for the future and stuff. So in season 4, it should be interesting because we're finally going to be going to Yavin, as was indicated in the finale, so we can finally get to see the rebels and their actions at Yavin and how they're more involved more closely as with the rest of the rebellion, and how this is all starting to really come together to form the close-knit more group of the rebellion that will transition us into the Rogue One. Also, so in this season, let's see, some things. So a lot of people, or at least a couple of people, are thinking that Saw Gerrera is going to return, which would be interesting. Also, to get to see Ahsoka again is a high want of fans, including myself, because I love Ahsoka, and Dave Filoni said that we would, I'm 99% sure he said we would see at least a little bit more to close up her kind of arc in the series, I guess, which would be interesting, and maybe we'll get to see some more Thrawn since he survived through season 3, and also it will just be interesting to see what new missions or new adventures are going to go on now that they're more involved with this bigger side of the rebellion, and I'm excited to see what will come next in this journey adventure. And also, guys, on that note, make sure to go, if you're not in Orlando, Florida, and going to Star Wars Celebration, make sure to watch the Rebels Season 4 Rebels panel this Saturday at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time and 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, because Dave Filoni will probably release a lot of cool secrets and hopefully a trailer, and that should be on StarWars.com and on Star Wars YouTube page. It's a live stream that's going up in multiple different places. Just keep an eye out for that because it should be interesting. And if you made it this far in the video, I congratulate you. Thanks for watching my video, and even if it's just me rambling on about a show I love to watch. And I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys again soon. Bye!